Good evening, friends and comrades, and welcome to Acquittal, a MesmePolitics special. As Donald Trump has been acquitted by the US Senate on his impeachment charge. That was awfully loud. Welcome along. Hello. With you for the next half hour, I'm Toby Lepati Mesme, and we are taking a special look tonight on this one-off show, looking at how we got to this place, how and why Donald Trump's impeachment after inciting an insurrection led to acquittal on a 57 to 43 vote in favour of impeachment. 7 Republicans voting to impeach, but not the 17 required. Welcome along. If you have any thoughts, you can get in touch in the chat, and we would, of course, encourage and welcome that. So, 3 sections. We did similar on another of our specials. So we want to look at the past, we want to look at the present, and we want to look at the breaking news. First, the past. I think it bears reminding, when we look at Donald Trump, who's a fascinating figure, that it's always been the case. He has always been a misogynist, a racist, a rapist, a sexist, a religious bigot, a transphobe, a homophobe. He is an anti-Semite, an Islamophobe. He has always been all of these things. He's always displayed all these things. He's always had contempt for the basic notions of democracy that many of us just take for granted as a flaw to build up from. And he always had the temperament of a sociopath, the social agenda of someone in the 1950s, and a unique personality that made him so unfit to be anywhere near high office. You know, a history of lying, scamming, a myth of being self-made. Basically a con artist. He was always all these things. And so many knew he was always all these things. This is Donald Trump in June 2016 on the campaign trail.
The killer, whose name I will not use or ever say, was born an Afghan of Afghan parents who immigrated to the United States. His father published support for the Afghan Taliban, a regime which murders those who don't share its radical views, and they murdered plenty. The father even said he was running for president of Afghanistan. The bottom line is that the only reason the killer was in America in the first place was because we allowed his family to come here. That is a fact, and it's a fact we need to talk about. We have a dysfunctional immigration system which does not permit us to know who we let into our country, and it does not permit us to protect our citizens properly. We have an incompetent administration, and if I'm elected president, that will not change. I will tell you, that will not change over the next 4 years. We have an administration that will not change. But if I get in there, it's going to change, and it's going to change quickly. We're going from totally incompetent to just the opposite, believe me. Thank you. With 50 people dead, and perhaps more ultimately, and dozens more wounded, we cannot afford to talk around issues anymore. We have to address these issues head on.
And then, of course, the infamous bit.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. You have no choice.
The so-called land of the free.
Choice.
Rapturous applause for that. Rapturous applause. And then he won the presidency. He's always been all of these things. The liberal media, throughout his term, at various points slipped, took its eyes off the ball, capitulated to Trump where necessary, when he was pardoning war criminals, when he was committing war crimes, all these things that all the presidents did. Your CNNs and your MSNBCs were nowhere to be seen. They were, however, there to be seen when they slandered Bernie Sanders and when they critiqued Trump for not being hostile enough towards Russia. So, the liberal media landscape was equally brain dead throughout. Trump's brand of politics combined the social policies of the Nixon era with the economic policies of the Reagan era. Undoubtedly one of the most right-wing presidencies in modern times. In terms of foreign policy, Trump-era atrocities were nowhere near the atrocities and the treachery of the Bush administration, but still were very, very grave. Trump, of course, at his inauguration, talked about American carnage.
The center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens. Americans want great schools for their children, safe neighborhoods for their families, and good jobs for themselves. These are just and reasonable demands of righteous people and a righteous public. But for too many of our citizens, a different reality exists. Mothers and children trapped in poverty in our inner cities, rusted out factories scattered like tombstones across the landscape of our nation, an education system flush with cash, but which leaves our young and beautiful students deprived of all knowledge. And the crime, and the gangs, and the drugs that have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
We very often forget what a strong place Trump was in politically. Rising unemployment for African Americans, for all the different for women, etc., all the different groups that he often cited. Of course, his proclamations were exaggerated, but the reality is, economically, the Trump administration was given credit, not necessarily rightfully, but because the economy was looking as good as the American economy ever does, for working people during the time that he was in office, he obviously took the full credit for that, and the public believed that, and it fed into the image they already had of him, even those that didn't like him, that he was somehow good on the economy, that he was a good businessman. It was an extremely strong place politically. People shouldn't dismiss, the appeal of Trump, but also around the country, how popular he was at one point. He's always been polarizing, but we have to reckon with the fact things were looking really good in terms of re-election pre-COVID.
No, I'm totally off script right now. The Green New Deal, right? Darling, is the wind blowing today? I'd like to watch television, darling. Russia, please, if you can, get us Hillary Clinton's emails. Please, Russia, please. He asked Russia to go get the emails. We're going to look into his finance. I said, where did that come from? He always talked about Russia. The Attorney General says, I'm going to recuse myself. And I said, why the hell didn't he tell me that before I put him in? Russia, 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 Russia. My wife said, you never spoke to anybody from Russia, darling. I said, that's right. President Trump is waiting for the Mueller report. He's bad. He's a bad guy. But you know what I like about this? Number one, I'm in love, and you're in love. We're all in love together. We've done something that nobody's ever done. Hey, Don, how you doing? Hey, Donnie. I love you, Donnie. For 35 years now, they call Mr. President, sir. How are you? Trains to Hawaii. How do you get to Europe? We haven't figured that one out yet. We don't use airplanes anymore. Is doing well, except, of course, for the never-Trumpers. But they are on mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. You don't get rich by sitting behind a desk, so I didn't want to do that. And I'm in the White
That's Donald Trump there. Yeah, really drives home the sublime to the ridiculous. Anyway, COVID then hit, of course, and that changed things somewhat. COVID-19 was Donald Trump's undoing. Without a shadow of a doubt, it is what prevented him being re-elected. It is why President Biden is currently sitting in the White House, and it is, in a perverse way, the most hideous development in all of our lives that none of us are happy about in any way. Is what spared America from another 4 years of a far-right presidency. Mainly because of things like this.
Supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that has him in check, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me. The new headline is Trump asks people to go outside. That's dangerous. Here we go. Same old group. You ready? I hope people enjoy the sun. And if it has an impact, that's great. I'm just hearing this, not really for the first time. I mean, there's been a rumor that, a very nice rumor that you go outside in the sun or you have heat and it does have an effect on other viruses. But now we get it from one of the great laboratories of the world, I have to say. It covers a lot more territory than just this. This is probably an easy thing, relatively speaking, for you. I would like you to speak to the medical doctors to see if there's any way that you can apply light and heat to cure, if you could. And maybe you can, maybe you can't. Again, I say maybe you can, maybe you can't. I'm not a doctor, but I'm like a person that has a good, what.
But sir, you're the president.
Deborah, have you ever heard of that, the heat and the light relative to certain viruses, yes, but relative to this virus?
Not as a treatment. I mean, certainly fever.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, you see, here you go. So the failure to, even on a superficial, very basic level, lead during the crisis, took the prospects, because of an already strong economy, of Donald Trump's re-election, which could have turned into an even, a proper landslide re-election, as the country rally around the flag, took that guaranteed landslide if he just turned up, shut up, let the experts talk, read off a piece of paper, didn't even have to sound like he cared, and did his job. That failure to lead, that's entirely his, right? He could have kept power, but because he's so pathologically unfit, he couldn't do it. He turned a guaranteed landslide into defeat. He lost to an opposition party whose candidate was a joke in the middle of a global pandemic where leaders around the world had sky-high approval ratings. Because of Trump's behaviour, he only got a short-lived boost in the polls. Donald Trump was his own worst enemy. He brought himself down and he brought his party down with him. And for that, we can thank him. It really does defy belief. It really does. And of course, regarding the electoral shenanigans, he laid the seeds for it right through the 2020 election. He knew he was losing, so he laid the seeds for Stop the Steal. He radicalised his party. He pulled it with him. The base embraced a fever dream completely devoid from any basis in reality. And you can hear that here at the Republican National Convention.
This is the greatest scam in the history of politics.
After officially securing the nomination to be his party's choice to face Democrat Joe Biden in the November 3rd election,
The greatest president ever.
President Donald Trump adopted a grim tone in his first remarks on day one of the Republican National Convention, saying without evidence that he could face a rigged election, and repeated his claim that voting by mail could lead to an increase in fraud.
They'll be sending them, they'll be dumping them in neighborhoods. They'll be people are going to be picking them up. They'll be bribing. They'll be paying off people to grab some. We're going to win this election. The only way they can take this election away from us is if this is a rigged election. We're going to win this election.
Trump's remarks on Monday came in an unscheduled appearance on the first day of the scaled-back Republican convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, a far smaller event than originally planned. But it still marked a contrast with Democrats who opted for an almost entirely virtual format instead of gathering in the election battleground state of Wisconsin.
They didn't go there at all. They didn't do this. We did this out of respect for your state. We didn't do this for any other reason other than respect for the state of North Carolina.
The Republican convention will not include speeches from the party's past living presidents or candidates, including former President George W. Bush and 2012 Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney, who voted to convict Trump at the president's impeachment trial in the Senate. Also absent from the schedule are several Republicans facing close elections in November, including North Carolina's very own Senator Thom Tillis. Meanwhile, 27 former Republican lawmakers, including former Senator Jeff Flake, endorsed Biden for president on Monday, citing Trump's, quote, corruption, destruction of democracy, blatant disregard for moral decency, and urgent need to get the country back on course as reasons for backing the Democratic candidate.
There's the YMCA music. So, really the pits. The Capitol attack should weigh on the consciences of all Republicans. Every Republican that voted to acquit President Trump, but more importantly, every Republican that enabled him, that stayed in the party, that enabled him, that stayed silent, that hoped it would go away. As soon as he became the nominee, as soon as he won them an election, shut up, basically, completely shut up, let him do what they wanted. Let this man wreak havoc at the top of, Commander-in-Chief, of the most powerful nation in the world, most militarily powerful nation in the world, for 4 years. And of course, the inevitable conclusion of it all occurred.
Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. This feeds into white supremacist narratives, It's illegitimate because people of colour voted, because immigrants voted, because people who aren't white men voted. It must be illegitimate. Of course, those are the principles on which the country was founded. White supremacy and misogyny, much more so than egalitarianism or democracy. America is barely a functioning democracy now. It's basically a kleptocracy, or maybe even an oligarchy. But even then, if we discount that, it wasn't, by any definition of the word, a functioning democracy until at least, at the very least, the 1960s. And it's actually going backwards on that because of Republican gerrymandering. But anyway, I digress. There is serious danger lurking ahead in terms of American politics, in terms of that genie of far-right violence coming out of the bottle. We're yet to see how much that will escalate under the Biden presidency and what sinister security measures that will sanction being enforced by the Democrats. But the aggressive neo-Nazi far-right violence is coming. Only time will tell how severe. That is why, above all else, impeachment is necessary. Impeachment was necessary, even if it was a folly, to hold Trump to account for what he did. And tonight was the vote, whether to convict or not, was the final stress test of American democracy. If you're going to impeach a president, it will be for something like this. If you're not going to impeach a president, it tells us consequently, once and for all, in concrete, etched in a tombstone, the tombstone of American democracy, whether politicians will ever cross party lines to hold corrupt politicians to account, to hold our leaders to account. Now, of course, it was an interesting trial. It was a damp squib, basically. The whole thing has been a damp squib because it's panned out completely how we expected it to. Completely how we expected it to, in the end.
Donald Trump has been acquitted by the Senate. 43 not guilty, 57 guilty. They needed to reach 67 guilty, two-thirds of the Senate, or just over, to get that guilty verdict through. So he has been acquitted. Our correspondent in Washington is Adam Parsons. I mean, this is no surprise, Adam, but 7 Republicans did vote against President Trump.
Yeah, it's probably the higher end of expectations. Ted Cruz, actually, this morning, Republican senator, saying that he thought it would be somewhere between 53 and 57, including Bill Cassidy and Mitt Romney, notable figures voting against the former president, but no, not enough, and frankly nowhere near enough to get him convicted. That's the pro tempore president there, just going through the results. The fact is that now Donald Trump has not just been the first president to be accused twice in an impeachment trial. He's now the first person to be acquitted twice, and he will consider this to be an exoneration of him, his reputation, and also, I think, he will probably be emboldened by this and say that this actually justifies all of the claims he made that meant that he was legally sound in doing them. Look, he's lost by 57 to 43, but he will portray this as a victory over the establishment who have tried once again to get him. And I think in the Democrat side, they will look and say, well, they got a number of Republican senators joining this.
So there you go. That is from Sky News there. Complete damp squibbing of an affair. The defence arguments were unhinged, completely unhinged, shouting, being laughed at in the chamber. Full, angry middle-aged men, sort of proper Trump-style rhetoric. Republicans have weaseled their way out of accountability so much, going, yes, this isn't good, but actually, this procedural quip or this constitutional thing, nonsense. Republicans will find any little sort of irrelevant paragraph and go, this is why I can't support this thing that's obviously morally just. Damp squibbing of an affair, and the votes of Republicans to acquit should undoubtedly be held as a permanent stain. A permanent stain on their records, a permanent stain on their party's records, and I sincerely hope that history will judge them for the charlatans that they are. Here's Chuck Schumer.
January 6th will live as a day of infamy in the history of the United States of America. The failure to convict Donald Trump will live as a vote of infamy in the history of the United States Senate. 5 years ago, Republican senators lamented what might become of their party if Donald Trump became their presidential nominee and standard-bearer. Just look at what has happened. Look at what Republicans have been forced to defend. Look at what Republicans have chosen to forgive. The former president tried to overturn the results of a legitimate election and provoked an assault on our own government. And well over half the Senate Republican conference decided to condone it. The most despicable act that any president has ever committed, and the majority of Republicans cannot summon the courage or the morality to condemn it. This trial wasn't about choosing country over party, even not that. This was about choosing country over Donald Trump. And 43 Republican members chose Trump. They chose Trump. It should be a weight on their conscience today, and it shall be a weight on their conscience in the future.
So, nice words, nice rhetoric. But we do have to remember, Democrats should own a share of this as well, share of the blame, for enabling Republicans for decades, capitulating to an increasingly aggressive far-right GOP, and basically allowing this radicalisation and transformation in American politics to the right to occur. We also heard Schumer talking about, how Trump was the worst president ever. Hello, George Bush. And then talking about, how George Washington was a great example and Donald Trump isn't. And actually, if we look at it, George Washington came in off the back of a genocide and ruled a white supremacist middle-class colony. Even by Trump standards, Trump is far less morally abhorrent than George Washington. You might not like that I'm saying that, but it's true. Here's Mitch McConnell, again, weaseling his way out of things.
Former officials who were not eligible for impeachment or conviction, they were, and this is extremely important, still liable to be tried and punished in the ordinary tribunals of justice. Put another way, in the language of today, President Trump is still liable for everything he did while he was in office as an ordinary citizen. Unless the statute of limitations is run, still liable for everything he did while he was in office. Didn't get away with anything yet. We have a criminal justice system in this country. We have civil litigation. And former presidents are not immune from being accountable by either one.
Then why the hell didn't you vote to convict? There was a little period, a few days, where it looked like some Republicans, like McConnell Wood, they've shown themselves to be unprincipled charlatans. The contempt with which I hold them cannot be measured. The contempt with which I hold various liberal pundits and commentators who basically see this whole thing as a joke and some entertaining TV to watch is immense. Mitch McConnell basically came out and condemned Trump. You can't do that. You don't have the right to come out and condemn Trump. After you voted, you stood up in the Senate with your career on the line, with your professional reputation on the line, with how you'll be remembered in the history books on the line. And you decide, once again, to do what you've always done and be a worthless parliamentary junkie, piece of obstructionist crap, and vote to acquit the guy. And it's worse. You're worse than the lunatics, because he's not a lunatic, is Mitch McConnell. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows what happened was wrong. He is appalled by it. He voted to acquit because he is a coward. There is no, top Democrats lauding working with Mitch McConnell at the beginning of the election. At the beginning of, as the Biden presidency came in, you had centrist Republicans and centrist Democrats saying, oh, Biden and McConnell, they'll bring the country together, when it still looked like McConnell would control the Senate. Thankfully, we've been spared of that for at least another couple of years, another 18 months or so. You have no right to do this. It's worse because he knows how abhorrent it is, and he's still chosen to do what he does. And liberal pundits and centrist pundits have gone, this guy will unify the country. He's not a principled or a better Republican. They're all in the pits with this. They're all as bad as each other. There are no good Republicans. Even the ones who voted to acquit, to impeach, to convict, almost exclusively, with very few exceptions, enabled most of the worst of Trumpism, including voting for the bloated defense budgets, which plenty of Democrats did as well. Most Democrats. In short, the system is broken. Clearly, impeachment doesn't work. There is no justice in America. That's been confirmed once and for all. And Trumpism will continue because no one in the halls of power is actually serious about stopping it. Thank you for listening to the MesmePolitics special. I've been Toby Lepati Mesme. I'm back with another edition of MesmePolitics as per usual on Monday at 7 p.m. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. Your next MesmePolitics special should be, unless anything new and dramatic comes up, at the beginning of March, or March time, for Joe Biden's first State of the Union address and the Republican response to it, as the new president sets out his vision for the year, the first of 4 over his presidency, if he serves the full term.